Hey guys, welcome back to Cyber Platter. Today we will learn about vulnerability management interview questions. This is part 2. We have part 1 as well. We covered almost 12 questions in that. So I highly recommend going through this video before you start with the new one. I will link this in the description box. There are other videos too covering many other cybersecurity topics. It can be of interview, say SIM, SOC, networking, or individual cybersecurity topics like identity and access management, incident response. I will link those as well in the description box. Today's first question: explain the concept of a vulnerability management maturity model. A vulnerability management maturity model is a framework that organizations use to assess and improve their ability to effectively identify, prioritize, mitigate, and manage vulnerabilities in their information technology infrastructure. It provides a structured way to measure an organization's maturity in its vulnerability management practices and offers a roadmap for progression. The model typically consists of various stages or levels, each representing a higher degree of maturity in the organization's vulnerability management process. And these stages often align with best practices and industry standards. The specific stages and components of a vulnerability management maturity model may vary depending on the framework that is being used. You may be using maturity models like CMMI, that is Capability Maturity Model Integration, or SMM, that is Security Maturity Model by Cybersecurity, or NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology. So, based on what you use, the stages and levels may vary, but we will see the general levels that is included in most of these models. First one, initial or reactive stage. Organizations at this stage have an ad hoc approach to vulnerability management. Vulnerability scanning may occur occasionally or in response to an incident. There is very little coordination between teams, and the vulnerabilities are often addressed reactively. Second level is managed or basic. Vulnerability management activities are more organized and regular in this stage. A basic process for scanning, identifying, and tracking vulnerabilities is in place. Vulnerabilities are reported to relevant teams for remediation, but the process lacks automation and may rely on spreadsheets or simple tools. Next level is define or proactive. Vulnerability management is integrated into the organization's processes and culture. Formal policies and procedures for vulnerability scanning, assessment, and remediation exist. Automation and more advanced tools are used to streamline the process. The organization has a clear understanding of its assets and associated vulnerabilities. Fourth level is measured or optimizing. The organization regularly measures and reports on the effectiveness of its vulnerability management program. Continuous monitoring and risk assessments are in place to prioritize vulnerabilities based on their potential impact, and there is a focus on improving the efficiency and effectiveness of the program through metrics and feedback. The final level is optimized or strategic. Vulnerability management is fully integrated into the organization's risk management strategy. Advanced analytics, threat intelligence, and automation are used to proactively identify and mitigate vulnerabilities. The organization has a strong culture of security and a well defined incident response plan, that is IR plan. So, these are the 5 levels generally, that is what is used. The first one is initial or reactive. Next is managed or basic. Then we have define or proactive. Then measured or optimizing. Last step is optimized or strategic. Now let's see some of the benefits of using a vulnerability management maturity model. First one is a clear roadmap for improvement. That is, organizations can identify their current state and set goals for advancing their vulnerability management practices. Next, better better risk management. As organizations progress through the maturity levels, they become more proficient at prioritizing and addressing the most critical vulnerabilities, reducing the overall risk. Next, cost savings. Efficiency improvements and automation can lead to cost savings by reducing the time and effort required to manage vulnerabilities. Next benefit is compliance. Many industry regulations and standards like PCI DSS or HIPAA require organizations to have effective vulnerability management programs. A maturity model can help ensure compliance. So this is about vulnerability management maturity model. Let's go to the next question. How is vulnerability management impacted by cloud computing and virtualization? Vulnerability management is significantly impacted by cloud computing and virtualization in various ways. While these technologies offer numerous benefits, they also introduce new challenges and considerations for securing an organization's infrastructure. Let's see some of the key ways vulnerability management is influenced by cloud computing and virtualization. First one, increased attack surface. Cloud computing often involves the use of virtual machines, containers, and other virtualized resources. These technologies can increase an organization's attack surface as there are more entry points for potential attackers. Each virtual instance can introduce its own set of vulnerabilities that need to be identified and managed. Next, dynamic and transient environments. Cloud environments are dynamic with virtual machines and containers being provisioned and deprovisioned as needed. This creates challenges in terms of maintaining an up-to-date inventory of assets and managing vulnerabilities in environments that are constantly changing. Next, shared responsibility model. In many cloud service models, there is a shared responsibility for security between the cloud provider and the customer. While the cloud provider may handle the security of the underlying infrastructure, customers are responsible for securing their applications and data. This division of responsibility requires clear understanding and coordination in vulnerability management. So, there is a video which explains what is shared responsibility in cloud. I will link that in the description box if you want to know more about it. Next, rapid scalability. Cloud and virtualization technologies allow for rapid scaling of resources to meet demands. Vulnerability management must be able to adapt to the dynamic nature of cloud environments and be capable of assessing vulnerabilities in large and rapidly changing infrastructures. Next, elasticity and automation. Cloud environments often leverage automation for scaling, provisioning, and configuration management. Vulnerability management can benefit from these automation capabilities by automating vulnerability scans, assessments, and remediation processes. Next, multi-cloud and hybrid environments. Many organizations use multiple cloud providers or maintain a hybrid environment that includes on-premises infrastructure. Managing vulnerabilities across these diverse environments requires a holistic approach and tools that can work across different platforms. Next, containerization. The use of containers such as Docker and Kubernetes is very common in cloud native applications. Containers can have their own set of vulnerabilities and require specialized tools for scanning and assessing container images and configurations. Next, API security. Cloud environments often rely on APIs for interaction and automation. These APIs can introduce vulnerabilities if not properly secured. Vulnerability management should extend to API security assessments. Next, visibility and monitoring. Effective vulnerability management in cloud environments requires enhanced visibility and monitoring tools to track changes, assess vulnerabilities, and respond to incidents in real time. Next, compliance and governance. Many industries have specific compliance requirements that organizations must meet. Cloud computing and virtualization can affect compliance considerations, making it important to adapt vulnerability management practices to ensure compliance in these environments. So, in summary, cloud computing and virtualization have transformed the way IT infrastructure is designed and managed. Vulnerability management in these environments requires a proactive and adaptive approach that accounts for the dynamic nature of cloud resources, shared responsibility, and the evolving threat landscape. Specialized tools and methodologies are often necessary to effectively manage vulnerabilities in cloud and virtualized environments. Next question: can you describe a situation where effective vulnerability management could have prevented a major security incident? A real time example of how effective vulnerability management could have prevented a major security incident is the Equifax data breach that occurred in 2017. So, Equifax is one of the major credit reporting agencies in the United States. It was using Apache Struts web application framework in its online dispute portal. A critical vulnerability in Apache Struts, known as CVE 2017 5638, was disclosed in March 2017. This vulnerability allowed remote code execution and was relatively easy to exploit. Equifax failed to apply the necessary security patches to address the Apache Struts vulnerability promptly. This vulnerability remained unpatched in their systems. So, cyber criminals discovered the unpatched vulnerability and exploited it to gain unauthorized access to Equifax systems. They eventually exfiltrated sensitive personal and financial data of nearly 174 million individuals. Equifax only discovered the breach late in July 2017, several months after the vulnerability was disclosed. By then, extensive data had been stolen, resulting in one of the most significant data breaches in history. So, if Equifax had an effective vulnerability management program in place, the outcome of this incident could have been different. So, regular vulnerability scanning and assessment of their IT infrastructure would have identified the unpatched Apache Struts vulnerability quickly after it was disclosed. Equifax vulnerability management program would have prioritized the patching of this critical vulnerability. The necessary updates could have been applied swiftly with a well defined patch management process. Security awareness training for employees could have increased vigilance against potential threats, making it less likely for the attackers to successfully exploit the vulnerability. In the event that the vulnerability was still exploited, Equifax incident response, that is IR plan, would have facilitated a faster detection and response, potentially limiting the extent of the data breach. So, the Equifax data breach serves as a real world example of how the absence of effective vulnerability management, including timely patching and security awareness, can lead to a major security incident with severe consequences for both the affected organization and the individuals whose data is compromised. Next question: what is the principle of least privilege and how does it relate to vulnerability management? So, this is also known as minimal privilege or the principle of least authority. It is a fundamental concept in information security and access control. It dictates that individuals or systems should be granted the minimum level of access, permissions, or privileges necessary to perform their tasks and no more. In other words, users should have the least privilege required to carry out their job responsibilities, and any additional access beyond that should be restricted. Now, let's see how the principle of least privilege is related to vulnerability management. First one, minimizing attack surface. By following the principle of least privilege, organizations reduce their attack surface. When users, applications, or systems have only the permissions they need, the potential for exploitation of vulnerabilities is diminished. Attackers who gain unauthorized access have fewer opportunities to move laterally within the network or escalate privileges. Next, limiting the exposure to vulnerabilities. Users and systems with excessive privileges can inadvertently or maliciously misuse those privileges. This potentially leads to vulnerabilities. For example, a user with administrative privileges who unintentionally installs malicious software can introduce a security vulnerability. Enforcing least privilege limits such risks by restricting users' ability to perform actions that could lead to vulnerabilities. Next, mitigating insider threats. The principle of least privilege helps organizations mitigate insider threats. Even trusted individuals can become threats if they have excessive access. Limiting their privileges reduces the potential damage they can cause in the event of malicious intent or accidental actions. Next, vulnerability management and remediation. When vulnerabilities are identified through vulnerability assessments and scans, remediation often involves applying patches, updates, or security configurations. By following the principle of least privilege, organizations ensure that only authorized individuals or systems can apply these changes. This reduces the risk of mistakes or unauthorized alterations during the remediation process. Next, access control. Effective vulnerability management includes securing access to systems and data. Principle of least privilege is a key aspect of access control. It helps ensure that individuals or systems do not have unnecessary access to sensitive resources, reducing the potential for unauthorized changes that could lead to vulnerabilities. Continuous monitoring. As part of vulnerability management, organizations need to continuously monitor their systems for new vulnerabilities. This includes ensuring that newly deployed systems and users are provisioned with the appropriate and minimal privileges. Continuous monitoring aligns with the principle of least privilege by adapting to changes in the organization's environment and access requirements. Next, compliance and risk management. Many compliance frameworks and risk management strategies advocate for the implementation of the principle of least privilege. Organizations that follow this principle are more likely to meet compliance requirements and reduce the risk of non compliance related vulnerabilities. So, in summary, the principle of least privilege is a critical security concept that helps organizations minimize risk, protect against vulnerabilities, and maintain a more secure and controlled environment. It is an integral part of a comprehensive vulnerability management strategy that aims to prevent, detect, and mitigate security vulnerabilities within an organization's IT infrastructure. Next question. How do you handle vulnerabilities in legacy systems or unsupported software? Handling vulnerabilities in legacy systems or unsupported software can be challenging as these systems may no longer receive security updates or patches from the vendor. However, it's essential to address these vulnerabilities to minimize security risks. And let's see some of the ways how to handle them. First, isolate and segment. Consider isolating legacy systems from the rest of your network to minimize their exposure to potential threats. This can involve creating a separate network segment or using firewalls and network access controls to limit access to these systems. Risk assessment. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to identify the most critical vulnerabilities in the legacy systems. Assess the potential impact on your organization if these vulnerabilities were to be exploited. Next, network monitoring. Implement continuous network monitoring and intrusion detection systems to detect any unusual or malicious activity targeting the legacy systems. This can help identify potential threats early. Next, Application whitelisting. Restrict the execution of software and applications on legacy systems to only approved and trusted programs. This can reduce the risk of running malicious code. Next, access control. Implement strict access controls and user authentication for legacy systems. Limit user privileges to the minimum necessary for performing their tasks, following the principle of least privilege. Next, application level security. Harden the security of the applications running on legacy systems. Disable unnecessary services, limit ports, and use secure configurations to reduce the attack surface. Next, vulnerability scanning. Regularly scan the legacy systems for vulnerabilities using specialized tools designed for legacy environments. While you might not receive vendor patches, these scans can help identify vulnerabilities and potential mitigations. Next, virtual patching. Implement virtual patching or network level security controls to block known attack vectors or exploit attempts targeting vulnerabilities in legacy systems. This can act as a temporary mitigation strategy. Next, security updates via third party. Explore third party security solutions or vendors that may offer security updates or patches for unsupported software. These solutions can provide a bridge until you can replace or upgrade the legacy systems. Next, legacy system replacement. Consider phasing out legacy systems and replacing them with modern supported alternatives. While this can be costly and time consuming, it's often the most effective long term solution. Next, isolation from the internet. If it is possible, restrict internet access for legacy systems to reduce the risk of exposure to web based threats. Isolate these systems from external networks and only allow necessary outbound traffic. Next, incident response, that is IR. Develop an incident response plan specific to legacy systems. Be prepared to respond rapidly in the event of a security incident or breach. This should include procedures for isolating compromised systems and recovering data. Next, regular backup and recovery. Implement regular backups of data on legacy systems. Ensure that backups are stored securely and can be used for recovery in case of data loss. And data loss can be due to security incidents or vulnerabilities. Next one, user education. Train users and administrators of legacy systems on security best practices, including how to recognize and report potential security threats. So, in summary, handling vulnerabilities in legacy systems and unsupported software requires a combination of proactive risk management, network segmentation, and temporary mitigation strategies. While it might not be a perfect solution, it can help reduce the security risks associated with these systems until they can be replaced or upgraded. Next question. What factors should you consider when deciding whether to patch or mitigate a vulnerability? So, when deciding whether to patch or mitigate a vulnerability, several factors should be carefully considered. The choice between patching and mitigation depends on the specific circumstances and the organization's risk tolerance. Let's see some of the key factors to take into account. First one, vulnerability severity. The severity of the vulnerability plays a significant role in the decision making process. High critical vulnerabilities with a high potential for exploitation should generally be patched promptly. Less severe vulnerabilities may be candidates for mitigation if patching is not immediately feasible. Next, exploitability. Consider the ease with which the vulnerability can be exploited. If there are known readily available exploits, it may be more urgent to apply a patch. On the other hand, if the vulnerability is difficult to exploit, mitigation measures might be sufficient. Next, availability of patches. Check whether the vendor has released patches for the vulnerability. If the patches are available, they should be applied when feasible. However, in some cases, vendors may not provide patches, especially for end of life software or legacy systems. Next, impact on business operations. Evaluate the potential impact of patching on critical business operations. Some patches may require system downtime or have compatibility issues that need to be addressed. Assess how these factors align with the organization's operational requirements. Next, testing. Thoroughly test patches in a non production environment to ensure they do not introduce new issues or conflicts with existing software or configurations. Patch testing can take time but is essential to prevent unintended consequences. Next, risk tolerance. Consider the organization's risk tolerance and the criticality of the affected systems. High value assets or systems with sensitive data may demand a more conservative approach, such as patching. Lower risk systems may allow for more flexible mitigation strategies. Next, regulatory and compliance requirements. Some industries and regulatory bodies require organizations to maintain up to date software with the latest security patches. Failure to comply with these requirements may result in legal and financial consequences, making patching necessary. Next, resource and time constraints. Evaluate the availability of resources to apply patches. Like, for example, if the personnel is available, time is available, budget is there. In cases where resources are limited or the patching process is complex and time consuming, mitigation may be a more practical interim solution. Next, mitigation options. Determine the availability and effectiveness of mitigation measures. This can include changes to configurations, firewall rules, or additional security controls that can reduce the risk associated with the vulnerability. Next, communication and reporting. Ensure effective communication with stakeholders, including executives and IT teams. Transparency about the decision to patch or mitigate, along with the rationale, is essential for informed decision making. Next, long term strategy. Consider the organization's long term strategy for system and software maintenance. If the affected systems are nearing the end of their life cycle, planning for upgrades or replacements may be a more strategic approach. Next, monitoring and reassessment. Implement continuous monitoring and reassessment of the vulnerability and the effectiveness of chosen measures. This enables adjustments to the strategy as the threat landscape evolves. So ultimately, the decision to patch or mitigate a vulnerability should be based on a careful analysis of these factors. The chosen approach should align with the organization's risk management strategy and its ability to balance security requirements with operational and resource constraints. In some cases, a combination of patching and mitigation may be the most appropriate strategy. Next question. Explain the concept of a risk register in the context of vulnerability management. So, in the context of vulnerability management, a risk register is a structured document or database that serves as a central repository for information related to identified vulnerabilities and the associated risks. It provides a systematic way to document, assess, prioritize, and manage vulnerabilities within an organization. The risk register is a fundamental tool for effective risk and vulnerability management. Let's see the components of a risk register. First one, vulnerability details. The risk register includes a comprehensive list of identified vulnerabilities. This list should provide details such as the name or description of the vulnerability, its severity, the affected systems or assets, and its classification. Next, risk assessment. For each vulnerability, the risk register assesses the potential impact on the organization, such as data loss, system compromise, operational disruption, or regulatory non-compliance. It also considers the likelihood of exploitation and any known exploits in the wild. Next, risk scoring. Vulnerabilities are often assigned a risk score or rating based on a combination of severity, likelihood, and other factors. Common scoring systems include the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, that is CVSS, or an organization specific scoring model. Next, prioritization. The risk register ranks vulnerabilities based on their risk scores or other prioritization criteria. High priority vulnerabilities which pose the greatest risk are typically addressed first. Next, mitigation and remediation actions. For each vulnerability, the register records the planned mitigation or remediation actions. This may include applying patches, implementing configuration changes, enhancing security controls, or other risk reduction measures. Next, owners and responsibility. Specify the individuals or teams responsible for addressing each vulnerability. This ensures accountability and clear lines of responsibility for remediation. Next, status and progress. Track the current status of remediation efforts for each vulnerability, indicating whether it is in progress, completed, or unresolved. Monitoring the progress of vulnerability management is essential. Next, target dates. Set target dates for the completion of remediation activities. These deadlines help ensure that vulnerabilities are addressed in a timely manner. Next, comments and notes. Allow for the inclusion of comments, notes, and additional information related to vulnerabilities, mitigation strategies, and progress. Now, let's see the benefits of a risk register in vulnerability management. First, centralized information. A risk register provides a single location to store and manage vulnerability information. It ensures that all stakeholders have access to consistent and up to date data. Next, prioritization. By assigning risk scores and priorities, the risk register helps organizations focus on the most critical vulnerabilities first. This optimizes resource allocation. Next, accountability. It clarifies who is responsible for addressing each vulnerability, which is essential for effective remediation efforts. Next, tracking and monitoring. The risk register enables continuous tracking of vulnerability remediation progress. This ensures that deadlines are met and vulnerabilities are mitigated in a timely manner. Next, reporting and communication. It serves as a valuable tool for reporting to executives and stakeholders, demonstrating the organization's commitment to security and risk management. Next, data driven decision making. By quantifying and categorizing vulnerabilities, the risk register facilitates data driven decision making for resource allocation and security investments. So, in summary, a risk register is a structured approach to managing vulnerabilities, providing a comprehensive view of the organization's security posture and risk exposure. It helps organizations prioritize remediation efforts, track progress, and communicate effectively about vulnerability management. Next question. What is the purpose of a vulnerability management policy? A vulnerability management policy is a formal document that outlines an organization's approach to identifying, assessing, prioritizing, and mitigating security vulnerabilities in its IT infrastructure. The purpose of a vulnerability management policy is to provide a structured framework and set of guidelines for managing vulnerabilities. Let's see some of the key purposes. First, establishing accountability. The policy defines roles and responsibilities for various individuals and teams involved in vulnerability management. It clarifies who is responsible for identifying, assessing, and remediating vulnerabilities within the organization. Next purpose, standardization. It sets standard procedures and practices for vulnerability management to ensure consistency, uniformity in how vulnerabilities are handled across the organization. This helps prevent ad hoc or inconsistent approaches. Next, risk mitigation. The primary purpose of vulnerability management is to reduce the organization's exposure to security risks. The policy provides a structured process for identifying and mitigating vulnerabilities, helping to protect critical assets and sensitive data. Next, prioritization. The policy establishes criteria and guidelines for prioritizing vulnerabilities based on their severity, potential impact, and relevance to the organization's operations and objectives. This ensures that resources are allocated to address the most critical vulnerabilities first. Next, compliance and governance. It helps the organizations comply with industry standards, regulatory requirements, and best practices related to security and vulnerability management. This is essential for maintaining a strong security posture and avoiding non compliance penalties. Next, resource allocation. The policy helps allocate resources efficiently by ensuring that the most significant vulnerabilities are addressed promptly. It aids in decision making regarding budget allocation and staff assignments for remediation efforts. Next, incident prevention. Effective vulnerability management helps prevent security incidents and breaches by addressing vulnerabilities before they can be exploited by attackers. This minimizes the organization's exposure to potential threats. Next, communication and awareness. The policy promotes clear and transparent communication about vulnerability management activities within the organization. It helps educate stakeholders, employees, and management about the importance of security and their roles in the process. Next, continuous improvement. The policy supports a culture of continuous improvement by requiring regular reviews and updates. It ensures that vulnerability management approaches evolve to address emerging threats and changing business needs. Next, documentation and accountability. It emphasizes the importance of maintaining detailed records and documentation related to vulnerability assessments, remediation efforts, and progress tracking. This documentation is valuable for audits and reporting. Next, response planning. The policy may include guidelines for incident response planning. This ensures that the organization is prepared to react swiftly to security incidents that result from unmitigated vulnerabilities. So, in summary, a vulnerability management policy is a fundamental and foundational document that guides an organization in its efforts to proactively identify, assess, and remediate security vulnerabilities. It provides a structured approach to security risk management, contributes to a strong security posture, and helps protect an organization's assets and data from threats. So that's it for today, guys. I hope this video helped you learn a little bit more about vulnerability management. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our videos. That will help us a lot. I will see you in another video with part 3 of vulnerability management with more questions and answers. Until then, take care of yourselves and bye bye.